At Thanksgiving, my sister discovered I had $12 million, and my family demanded I give it to her, claiming she deserved it more. Until last Thanksgiving, my family believed I was doing fine. Not rich. Not struggling. Just comfortably middle class. I never corrected them. Partly because I value my privacy. Mostly because I had learned a long time ago that money changes people, especially the people who already think they're entitled to yours. For some context, I'm 38. I own a software company that I started in my garage 12 years ago. The first 6 years were brutal. I slept in my office more nights than I can count. I maxed out credit cards. I missed birthdays. I nearly shut the company down twice. During those years, my family constantly reminded me that I was wasting my life. My older sister, Rachel, never missed an opportunity to compare me to herself. She had married young. Her husband worked in commercial real estate. They owned a large house, drove luxury SUVs, and posted every vacation on social media. According to my parents, Rachel had made responsible adult choices. I was the stubborn dreamer chasing impossible ideas. At every holiday dinner, someone inevitably asked when I planned to get a real job. Eventually, I stopped talking about work altogether. Then, about 3 years ago, everything changed. A larger technology company approached me about acquiring my business. The negotiations lasted months. When the deal finally closed, my share after taxes was just over $12 million. I stared at the bank balance for nearly an hour because it didn't feel real. The money changed my financial situation overnight. It didn't change how I lived. I stayed in the same house. I drove the same pickup truck. I kept shopping at the same grocery store. The only noticeable difference was that I stopped worrying every time an unexpected bill arrived. No one in my family knew, and I intended to keep it that way. Last Thanksgiving, my parents hosted dinner as usual. About 20 relatives crowded into the house. Everything felt normal, until dessert. My nephew, who had recently become obsessed with technology, asked what kind of work I actually did. Instead of giving my usual vague answer, I pulled out my phone and showed him a picture of one of the products my old company had built. He thought it was amazing. Then he asked the innocent question that changed the entire evening. "So, did you ever sell the company?" Before I could answer, Rachel laughed. She joked that if I'd actually sold a company, I'd probably be a millionaire by now. Several people chuckled. I smiled awkwardly and admitted that I had sold it. The room went quiet. Rachel asked how much. I immediately said I'd rather not discuss finances. That should have ended the conversation. Instead, my mother smiled and said there was no reason to keep secrets from family. I politely repeated that I preferred not to talk about money. Then my father said something I'd heard my entire life. "If you've got nothing to hide, why be so mysterious?" Everyone was looking at me. I felt cornered. Against my better judgment, I answered. I told them the sale had been worth a little over $12 million after taxes. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My nephew's eyes went wide. My cousins stopped eating. Someone actually dropped a fork. Rachel simply stared at me. Then she laughed. She insisted I had to be joking. When I calmly told her I wasn't, her expression changed completely. For the first time in my life, she looked at me the way my family had always looked at her, like she was no longer the successful one. For a few moments, nobody spoke. Then the questions started, not about my company, not about how I'd built it, not about the 12 years I'd spent risking everything, only about the money. My uncle wanted to know where I kept it. My cousin asked if I'd bought a yacht. Someone else asked why I was still driving that old truck. I answered politely. Most of the money was invested. I still liked my truck. And no, I had no interest in buying a yacht. Rachel barely said a word. She just kept staring at me. I could almost see the calculations happening in her head. Dinner ended awkwardly. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The very next morning, my mother called. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't congratulate me. Instead, she told me Rachel had been crying all night. Apparently, she felt betrayed that I'd hidden something so important from the family. I apologized if she'd been surprised, but I reminded my mother that my finances were private. Then she said something that made me pause. "Well, now that everyone knows, maybe this is a chance to help your sister." I asked what she meant. She explained that Rachel and her husband had accumulated a lot of debt over the past few years. Apparently, they had refinanced their house twice. They had expensive car payments, private school tuition, credit card balances, and a vacation home they'd been struggling to keep. I listened quietly. Then I asked the obvious question. "What does that have to do with me?" My mother hesitated, before finally saying, "She's family." That conversation ended quickly. Over the next week, more relatives suddenly remembered I existed. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in 3 years invited me to lunch. A cousin asked if I wanted to invest in his business idea. An uncle wanted advice about borrowing money for a land purchase. Every conversation somehow circled back to my bank account. I politely declined every request. Then Rachel called. She invited me over for coffee. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived, she was unusually friendly. She complimented my career. She apologized for teasing me over the years. She even admitted she'd underestimated me. For a brief moment, I thought maybe she genuinely wanted to repair our relationship. Then she slid a folder across the table. Inside were spreadsheets, mortgage statements, credit card balances, car loans, student loans, a complete breakdown of nearly $2 million in debt. I looked at her, confused. She smiled. Then calmly explained that she'd already discussed everything with Mom and Dad. According to all three of them, the simplest solution was for me to pay it off. I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. She explained that $12 million was more money than one person could ever need. Paying off her debts would barely affect my life. I asked how she'd come to that conclusion. She leaned back in her chair, then said something I'll never forget. You got lucky. Lucky. Not disciplined, not hardworking, not persistent. Lucky. According to Rachel, she'd worked just as hard as I had. The only difference was that life hadn't handed her the same opportunity. She genuinely believed the money belonged with the person who needed it more. Before I could respond, my parents walked through the front door. I hadn't known they'd been invited. Apparently, this wasn't a conversation. It was an intervention. The moment my parents sat down, I realized this had all been planned. 3 chairs had already been arranged around the dining table. 3 glasses of coffee were waiting. Even the folder had sticky notes marking specific pages. They hadn't invited me over for a family visit. They'd invited me to negotiate my own money. My father spoke first. He said the family had been discussing the situation. That phrase alone made my stomach turn. The family. As if everyone had voted on what should happen to money they'd never earned. He explained that Rachel had always put family first. She had children. She hosted holidays. She stayed close to home. Meanwhile, I'd spent years focused on my business instead of building a family. According to him, that made my success less necessary. I asked him to explain what that meant. He looked me straight in the eye, then said something I don't think I'll ever forget. Rachel deserves financial security more than you do. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I genuinely couldn't believe my own father had just said those words. I reminded him that Rachel already had financial security. She had simply chosen to spend beyond her means. Luxury vacations, designer handbags, brand new subs every few years, a vacation home they couldn't afford. None of those were emergencies. They were choices. My mother immediately interrupted. She insisted I was being judgmental. She claimed Rachel had been trying to keep up appearances because of her husband's career. I blinked, then asked the obvious question. So, I'm supposed to pay for appearances? Nobody answered. Rachel finally spoke. She said paying off her debts would change her children's lives forever. Private school, college funds, a stable future. She became emotional. She even started crying, for a brief moment. I actually felt guilty. Then she said the sentence that erased every bit of sympathy I had left. She looked directly at me and said, "You've never even wanted kids. What are you saving all that money for?" The room went completely silent. They were all waiting for my answer. I slowly closed the folder, pushed it back across the table, and calmly explained something they'd apparently never considered. Most of my wealth wasn't sitting in a checking account. It was invested, locked into long-term funds, charitable foundations, real estate, retirement accounts. I had spent years building a financial plan designed to last the rest of my life. I wasn't sitting on a mountain of cash waiting for someone to ask nicely. Rachel rolled her eyes. She accused me of making excuses. Then my mother delivered the final blow. She admitted she'd already told several relatives that I would probably help Rachel. I stared at her. "You told people I'd agreed?" She smiled awkwardly. "Not exactly. She'd simply said she was confident I'd do the right thing." Within hours, my phone started buzzing. Texts, calls, voicemails. Relatives I'd barely spoken to in years congratulated me for my generosity. Some even thanked me for saving Rachel's family. I hadn't agreed to anything. My own mother had volunteered my money before I'd even made a decision. That evening, while I was still trying to process everything, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't a relative. It was my financial advisor. His voice sounded unusually serious. He asked if I'd recently authorized anyone to request information about my accounts. My heart sank. I said no. He told me that earlier that afternoon, someone claiming to be my sister had called his office, and she hadn't just asked about my investments. She'd claimed she was helping me prepare a large family transfer. That's when I realized they weren't just trying to guilt me anymore. They were already trying to figure out how to get their hands on the money. The moment I hung up with my financial advisor, I called my attorney. By the end of the week, every one of my financial accounts had additional security measures in place. New passwords, voice verification, written authorization requirements. I wasn't taking any chances. A few days later, my advisor confirmed that no information had been released. Rachel had failed because she couldn't answer the security questions. But the fact that she tried was enough. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about trust. I sent one message to my parents and my sister. I told them that what Rachel had done was unacceptable. Trying to access someone else's financial information without permission crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Until they understood that, I would be stepping away from the family for a while. The responses came almost immediately. Rachel insisted she had only been asking questions. My mother accused me of overreacting. My father said families shouldn't involve lawyers and financial advisors against each other. Not one of them apologized. That silence told me everything I needed to know. Months passed. Birthdays came and went. So did Christmas. For the first time in my life, I spent the holidays with close friends instead of relatives. It was quieter. There were fewer presents. But there was also no one counting what was on my plate, no one asking about my bank account, and no one telling me what I owed them. It turned out peace was a much better holiday gift than obligation. About 6 months later, my father asked to meet. He came alone. He looked older than I remembered. He admitted something I'd suspected for years. Growing up, they had always expected Rachel to need rescuing. Whenever she made a bad financial decision, someone stepped in. First my grandparents. Then my parents. When those options ran out, they looked at me. He quietly admitted that they hadn't been asking me to help. They'd been expecting me to continue a pattern they'd created. For the first time, he apologized. Not for the money. For treating my success like it belonged to everyone except the person who earned it. I accepted his apology. But I also told him something he needed to hear. Helping someone who is facing genuine hardship is generosity. Paying for someone who repeatedly refuses to change is enabling. Those aren't the same thing. Rachel never apologized. Last I heard, she and her husband sold the vacation home, traded in their luxury SUVs, and moved into a smaller house. Ironically, once they stopped trying to look wealthy, their financial situation finally started improving. As for me, I eventually did something meaningful with part of the money. I created a scholarship fund for first-generation college students interested in engineering and computer science. Every year, it helps young people who work hard but simply need an opportunity. That felt like a far better use of my success than rewarding years of irresponsible spending. People still ask whether I should have just written Rachel a check. After all, I had $12 million. The answer is simple. If I'd paid off $2 million of debt created by years of reckless choices, I wouldn't have solved the problem. I would have taught my entire family that my hard work existed to protect them from the consequences of theirs. Money can solve financial problems. It can't solve entitlement. Looking back, the most painful part wasn't that my family wanted my money. It was that the moment they learned I had it, they stopped seeing me as a son, a brother, or a person. They saw me as an account balance. Losing that illusion hurt, but losing it also gave me something I'd never had before. The freedom to surround myself with people who value me for who I am. Not for what they think I can give them. And that turned out to be worth far more than $12 million.